Good morning, everybody. My name is Gary Brown. I am the statewide elder abuse coordinator for Attorney General Letitia James. And the reason the Attorney General created that position several years ago, statewide elder abuse coordinator, was a recognition that there are so many scams and frauds targeting older adults. As you're going to hear me explain, for the most part, unfortunately, we cannot catch the bad guys. It's even harder to recover the money. But these are preventable scams if we know how they work and we're forewarned about them. And so we've really ratcheted up our prevention efforts, and that's what we're going to do today. For the most part, is talk about how these scams and frauds work, so that if you're approached by one of the scammers with a text message or a phone call, you won't become a victim. But before I get to the scams, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what the Attorney General's office has been experiencing since the pandemic started now nearly a year ago. Initially, during the months of March through June or so, we were flooded with thousands and thousands of price gouging complaints about items like toilet paper, eggs, disinfecting wipes, paper towels, you name it. The price on these items skyrocketed and people filed thousands of complaints. At the Attorney General's office, we wound up issuing close to 2,000 cease and desist letters to businesses that we thought were engaged in price gouging. And just so you understand how New York's price gouging law works is, during a normal state of affairs, when there's no abnormal disruption of the market, we don't generally regulate prices. But when there's an abnormal disruption of the market caused by a pandemic or a snowstorm or a strike, then merchants cannot charge unconscionably excessive prices. It's not defined by law, but you kind of know it when you see it. So when you see the toilet paper that was going for $1.29 a roll now being sold for $10 a roll, for example, you know price gouging is going on. Since the summer, the number of complaints we've gotten about price gouging has really diminished tremendously. A couple of things happened. The industry caught up with the demand. The toilet paper manufacturers started making more toilet paper. And also, I think people stopped hoarding perhaps as much as they had been initially because of the normalization of the market. We are still getting some price gouging complaints about disinfecting wipes. For some reason, that's still the hard to find item in the pandemic. We are still getting price gouging complaints. But if you see a price that you think is unconscionably excessive during this pandemic era for a product, let us know and we'll follow up on it. The other type of complaint that we were besieged with at the outset of the pandemic and will be dealing with for months and years to come are so-called refund cancellation complaints. People who book venues for weddings or bar mitzvahs or bought tickets to cruises that they never were able to go on, and now they're having a hard time getting their money back. And so we've been dealing with these complaints across the state with restaurants, with caterers, with cruise lines, you name it, anything that people booked in advance. And sometimes the delay is something that can accommodate both the merchant and the consumer. So for example, if you were going to have a big party in June and you could put it off till June of last year, you could put it off till June of this year, you might be willing to wait. But if you were going to have your wedding at the venue and you decided to have a Zoom wedding instead, and you don't want to have another wedding ceremony a year later, you just want your money back, that's when things get difficult. So we're going to be dealing with those complaints for quite some time. The other thing that we've seen a lot of during the pandemic are advertisements generally online for fake cures and treatments for COVID-19. As of January, as of last month, the Federal Trade Commission had sent warning letters to over 320 companies across the internet that were selling or advertising fake cures, treatments, and preventative therapies for COVID-19. And many of the products and services were being aimed at older adults since they're more vulnerable to COVID-19 and more likely to have underlying medical conditions that put them at greater risk. We've gotten the vast majority of these websites taken down. By we, I mean both the Federal Trade Commission and the state AG's offices around the country. But to give you a sense of the kind of products that were being advertised that have been cracked down on, products containing cannabinol, colloidal silver, traditional Chinese remedies, homeopathic and naturopathic treatments, intravenous vitamin C therapies, nasal sprays, chiropractic treatments, electromagnetic field therapy, hydrotherapy, ozone therapy. These are all therapies or products that were being advertised online as being a preventative or a cure for COVID-19, of course, which was not the case. There was a company based in Texas that was touting mare's milk, that's horse milk, to help people recover from COVID-19. That product was taken down from Amazon. The Federal Trade Commission took action against Canadian Chaga, a Canadian company which was pitching its tea as being a treatment for COVID-19. Attorney General Tish James ordered Finest Herbalist, a company specializing in the sale of cannabinol, to immediately cease and desist the marketing of their product, Pure Herbal Total Defense Immunity Blend, as a means of treating or curing COVID-19. And even some famous people have gotten caught up in this. Radio show host Alex Jones was sent a cease and desist letter regarding Super Blue toothpaste. Televangelist Jim Baker was hawking a silver solution. The bottom line is, folks, as we all know, there are currently, other than the vaccine, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, there is no over-the-market treatment or cure for COVID-19. So if you see a product being advertised on that basis, it's bogus. And even here locally in my home county of Westchester, we issued a cease and desist letter to a spa in Yonkers that was claiming that its regimen, its yoga regimen, its therapeutic regimen could treat and prevent COVID-19. So we got them to take that language off their website. And now what we're beginning to see are vaccination scams. Now that the vaccine, thank goodness, is becoming available, it's very hard to get an appointment. I know myself, I'm 65 years old. It took me weeks to get an appointment for March 17th. So I'm going to still have to wait several more weeks. But we're beginning to see scammers try to take advantage of the situation. Scammers follow the headlines by offering you the ability, for a fee, of course, to jump the line, to get an appointment or get a reservation for a vaccination ahead of time. They're not going to be able to provide that service to you. So anyone who contacts you about a vaccination and says they want to know your personal financial information or your personal identifying information, hang up. It's a scam. Don't fall for it. Earlier on in the pandemic, we saw these fake face mask exemption cards being sold online. And I have the image in front of me. It's an ID card. It says face mask exempt card. I'm exempt from any ordinance requiring face mask usage in public. And then it goes on to say that it's issued by the FTBA, the Freedom to Breathe Agency. And it was being sold online for $50 a card, so that if you were confronted by a police officer or a security officer and told to put on a mask, you could display this card as a means of proving that you're exempt from the mask requirement. Of course, the cards were bogus, but the cat's out of the bag now. They're no longer being sold online, but the image is readily available online, and some people are downloading and printing it, but it's not a valid card. There's no such government agency as the Freedom to Breathe Agency, and the card isn't going to work for you. We're seeing some of the older scams that have been around for a while being targeted now during the pandemic. So there's a terrible scam called the grandparent scam, where the caller pretends to be the grandson. Your grandson calls early in the morning when you're asleep, wakes you up out of the deep blue sleep. You're not expecting the call, and all of a sudden it's your grandson saying he's been arrested in a foreign country. Grandma, don't tell my parents, they'll kill me if they find out, but I need you to send me money quick. Well, what that scam had been over the years was really a cold call, meaning they were just calling anybody over a certain age that they thought might have a grandchild. And the method of payment they were using increasingly with these scams was to tell the victim to go buy gift cards, call back with a serial number, which would allow the scammer to transfer the funds from the victim's gift card to their own. But what we're seeing lately during the pandemic is that the grandparent scam has become more targeted. The callers know the name of the grandson they're impersonating. They know the name of the grandparent they're calling. They know a lot of personal information, and then they're saying they will come and pick up the money in cash instead of having the victim go buy gift cards. And we think the reason that the scammers have shifted tactics somewhat is that a lot of older adults are understandably reluctant in this pandemic to go to the store and buy gift cards in the first place. But most people, however, probably have some cash around the house. So that's what the scammers are trying to take advantage of. It's a terrible scam. The other difference we're seeing in the grandparent scam is when they do call, oftentimes now, they're not actually claiming to be pretending to be the grandson. They're pretending to be a court officer or a bail bondsman or some official calling about your grandson who's been arrested. We need bail money or else he won't be released from jail, as opposed to impersonating the grandson. So we're seeing a mixture of the different methods they're using, but that's become a real problem during the pandemic. The Federal Trade Commission reports that the most common complaint they've received during the pandemic is about online shopping. And by that, they mean that people are ordering merchandise online, they're paying for it, and they're not receiving it. And in particular, there's been a real run of scams involving pets, where pets are being sold online and then never being delivered. So perhaps it isn't surprising that this is the #1 complaint, considering we're all ordering online to avoid going to the store whenever possible. I know on recycle day, where I live here in Westchester County, when I put the boxes out at the curb, it's like a mini city out there. I'm just ordering so much more stuff to be delivered than I ever did before. But the classic online shopping tips now apply more than ever. So purchase from reputable sites you've heard of and dealt with before. Don't respond to unsolicited email solicitations, and always pay by credit card. Don't pay by debit card, don't pay by cash, don't pay by any other method. because credit card is going to give you the most protection. As area police around the state have been reporting a texting scam during the pandemic meant to rip off churchgoers. The scammer pretends to be a pastor or a priest of the victim's church or the leader of any house of worship and sends text messages, attempting to collect gift cards claiming that they're going to be used for patients who are fighting COVID-19. They tell the victims to buy gift cards and send screenshots of the serial numbers on the back of the card, which allows the scammers to transfer the funds. This is a targeted scam. The scammers reportedly often know the victim's first name, which house of worship they belong to. Victims are asked to buy gift cards in small denominations instead of larger amounts to reduce the chance that a teller or a cashier selling the gift cards might spot the fraud and warn the victim. It's not a new scam. Scammers have been sending these text messages to churchgoers in the past, but in the pandemic, the claim that gift cards will benefit infected with COVID-19 really preys on people's generosity and makes the scam particularly compelling. But what I want to now jump to is to talk about some of the classic scams and how they're being tweaked for the pandemic. And what I think it's important to understand, if there's a misconception people have about scams, it's they think the scammers are trying to outsmart us. And to some degree that's true, but what the scammers are really trying to do is to prey on our emotions. They want to push an emotional button so that we're not really thinking at all. Our brain is taken out of the picture and we're reacting based on our emotions. So for example, with the grandparent call, if you're a grandparent and your beloved grandson calls in the middle of the night and says he's been arrested, the feeling of love and the feeling of affection and maybe some anger too at your stupid grandson for getting in trouble in the first place, but you're going to feel a witch's brew of emotions. And you may not be thinking, but wait a minute, my grandson's not in a foreign country. Wait a minute, let me call my grandson before I send any money. You may act based on your emotions, and that's what scammers are trying to do. And I think the best example of that is the guy who stole more money than anybody in the history of our country. He stole over $55 billion, the biggest con artist in the history of the United States, and that's Bernie Madoff. Madoff ran a Ponzi scheme. And to me, one of the important takeaways in the Madoff case is look at who his victims were. They were not stupid people. They were not unsophisticated people. They were among the smartest, most sophisticated individual and institutional investors in the country. The Wilpon family, who until recently owned the New York Mets baseball team, got caught up in this Ponzi scheme to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. They're smart people. It's not about intelligence. In the case of Madoff, Madoff used the greed factor. He offered a much higher return than you could get anywhere else. He said these investments were guaranteed. And deep down, I think there's an element of greed in all of us. We all want the best return on our investment. We'd all like to be the grand prize winner of the sweepstakes. And scammers will try to take advantage of that and prey on our greed. And that's what Madoff did very successfully. Elder abuse and scam victims often don't want to tell anyone that they've been a victim. They may be in denial. They may blame themselves. They may feel ashamed. If the abuser is someone like their own child or grandchild, there may be a codependency or a loyalty factor. But I think there's another thing that really leads a lot of people to be reluctant to admit that they've been a victim of the scam. And that's the fear of loss of self-control. And here's what I mean by that. I gave a speech upstate a couple of years ago, and afterwards a very well-dressed, well-appointed woman came up to me and started hugging and thanking me, saying that she had been the victim of the grandparent scam and she had lost $3,000. And when I said, well, you're welcome, but why are you thanking me? She said, because you're the first person I've ever told that I fell a victim of this scam. And it feels so good to finally get it off my chest. And I said, really? You didn't tell your adult children? You didn't tell your grandchild that you had been ripped off by this scam? And she went, oh no. If they knew I had been the victim of a scam like this, they'd think I've lost it. It's time to take over my finances, maybe time to put me in a nursing home or assisted living. She said, I'd rather suffer the loss of money in silence than risk the loss of self-control that I think might happen if I told anybody about it. And I think that is the reason why a lot of victims of these scams don't want to tell people. They're afraid they're going to have adverse consequences and results in their lives, and so they keep it to themselves. But imagine how terrible it must feel to be a victim of a crime, which is what these are, and not be able to tell anyone. If your car gets stolen, you call the police, right? If your house gets burglarized, you call the police. But if someone cons you out of $3,000 pretending to be your grandson, you don't want to tell anybody because you're afraid it's going to be used against you in some way down the road. Now, the most common way you're going to hear from a scammer is over the telephone. And one of the only good things about the pandemic is that during the early months of the pandemic, the number of scam calls dropped the scammers themselves weren't able to get to the office, so to speak, to get to the locations where these calls were being originated. But the volume of calls, unfortunately, has been rising steadily month by month, and it's now back to where it was before the pandemic. The average person in the United States gets 13.8 robocalls a month. In New York State, we get a little bit less. The average is about 8 calls per month. So how do these calls work? What are the callers trying to do? How are they trying to rip us off? Well, number one, they're going to try to push an emotional button. Number two, they're going to make themselves pretend to be someone who's either very trustworthy or believable or scary. And number three, and this is the telltale sign of a scam, they're going to tell you you have to act immediately, or else you're going to lose this once in a lifetime great opportunity, or else something really bad is going to happen. They don't want to give you time to think it over, to talk to an adult child, to talk to a grandchild, to talk to anybody. They want you to act. And so they're going to tell you that there are going to be dire consequences if you don't, or if it's the kind of scam where they're trying to lure you in, that you'll lose this once in a life opportunity if you don't act immediately. Probably the most common phone scam in the history of the United States is the so-called IRS scam, the Internal Revenue Service scam, where the caller pretends to be an IRS agent, says you owe back taxes, and if you don't pay up today, we're going to come and arrest you. And if you don't know that this is a fake call, this is a scary call to get. I think deep down, we're all kind of afraid of the IRS anyway, of being audited and told we owe back taxes, and this scam preys on that fear. Now, when you think about it, there are aspects of the call that don't make sense. For starters, does the IRS call you on the phone if you owe money? No, they communicate in writing. Number two, do they threaten you with same-day arrest if you don't pay your taxes? Of course not. And number three, do they tell you to pay your taxes by going to a Best Buy, buy some gift cards, and call back with a serial number? Of course not. You write them a check. So there are aspects of the call that don't make sense, but if you don't know it's a scam and you get the call out of the blue, you might be scared enough to fall for it. It's estimated that about 1 out of every 50 people who gets the IRS call falls for it and sends the money. But as more and more of us have become aware of the IRS scam, as more and more of us have either gotten the call or know people who did, the scammers are beginning to change their tactics. Instead of claiming to be an IRS agent, they're now more often, especially during the pandemic, claiming to be calling from Social Security. And there's a problem with your account, your number's been compromised, they want to confirm your Social Security number so they can use it to commit identity theft, or they want you to pay a fee so that your benefits aren't suspended. So, and it could relate to Medicare as well. So again, these agencies don't call you on the phone, don't fall for it, hang up the phone. Now, a scam that's been around for many years are the foreign lottery scams, where the caller says you've won the lottery in some foreign country, Spain, Canada, typically Jamaica. And all you have to do is pay the taxes in advance, and then they'll send you the $1 million that you won. Now, of course, for starters, you have to be in it to win it, as they say in the commercial. If you didn't enter the Spanish lottery, you couldn't have won it. And by the way, it's illegal to sell foreign lottery tickets in the United States. But also, if you do win the lottery, you don't pay the taxes in advance. They withhold the taxes from your winnings. So this is a way to lure you into sending money up front. And of course, you'll never get the winnings back. The utility scam, where the caller claims to be from your local utility and says you're behind in your bill and you're going to have your power cut off if you don't pay up today, by going out and running out and buying gift cards and calling back with a serial number. We've seen a real uptick on this scam during the pandemic. And I think the reason may be that a lot of people are behind in their electricity bills, or they're worried about falling behind because of the financial stress that we're all under. And so this scam has particular resonance. And I know that this one is a hard hitter because it almost suckered my mother. My mother called me about 2 or 3 years ago on a hot day in August, sounding more panicked than I've ever heard her sound in my entire life. She was screaming into the phone that Con Ed, she lived in Manhattan, Con Ed had called. She was $800 behind in her electricity bill. They were going to turn off the power that same afternoon unless she went out and bought gift cards and called back with a serial number. So I said, Mom, it's a scam. You've heard me talk about these. I tried to talk her off the ledge. For 15 minutes, she didn't want to hear it. She was so terrified and so scared of losing power. It was a hot day in August and she didn't want to lose her air conditioning. Finally, I calmed her down. I explained to her it was a scam. She was on her way to the store to buy the gift cards when she had called me. And if I had been able to pick up the call at the moment she happened to call, she would have gone and bought those gift cards, called back with a serial number, and been out $800. But just to show you how the emotions can run so strong, I pointed out to my mother, my son was living with her in the apartment in Manhattan. And as a means of defraying some of the expense of him living in the apartment, he pays the Con Ed bill online directly every month. She doesn't even pay the bill. So I said, Mom, you do realize, by the way, that you don't even pay the Con Ed bill. David, your grandson pays it. And she said, oh, you're right. And she went, I feel so stupid. But I said, Mom, it's not a matter of stupid. You're not a stupid woman at all. You're a very smart woman. It's a matter of that they preyed on your emotions. They made you think you were going to lose your air conditioning during a heat wave. And that's how scammers work. Charity scams. We're seeing a lot of charity scams during the pandemic because people know that we want to be generous to those in need. I mentioned the text calls, the text messages earlier that some churchgoers are getting. So be on the lookout. Make sure you're giving to a legitimate charity, a real charity. Do your homework, be generous, but be careful. The tech support scam has become increasingly common during the pandemic. This is one where the caller says, there's something wrong with your computer, isn't it? Give me online access and I can fix it for you. And since almost everybody thinks their computer is running slowly, there's a temptation, there's a tendency to go ahead and follow the instructions and give the caller online access. Sometimes you may see a pop-up screen on your computer that says the same thing. Well, if you give online access to these scammers, what they then do is they put malware on your computer, ransomware it's called. They lock your computer, and the only way you can get them to unlock it is to give them a credit card number. So be very wary of the tech support scam. It's estimated that the tech support scam works 1 in 6 calls. Most other scams work about 1 in 50. This one works 1 in 6. It's a very effective scam, so be on the lookout for it. As more and more people are feeling socially isolated during the pandemic, we've seen an uptick in romance scams. More and more older adults are going on websites like Match.com and many others, opening a profile and then hoping to meet someone that could be the next love of their life. The problem is that there are scammers who are on these websites as well with fake profiles. They make contact with people, then they start engaging them in some lovey-dovey kind of text messaging or emailing over a period of 2 or 3 months to make the victim think they've really met someone who might be the next love of their life. And then eventually comes the ask. And by that, I mean the ask for money. I've got some kind of personal problem. I have a medical bill I can't pay. I can't come see you, but I need you to send me money. And what's really hard about the romance scam is that oftentimes the victims do not want to believe that they're victims. If someone calls the Attorney General's office and says, I got a call from someone who says he's an IRS agent. Is that a scam? And we tell them it's a scam. They're relieved. They're happy to get the news. But when you tell somebody that the person that they're interacting with is a scammer, it's not the next love of their life. You're telling people something they don't want to hear. And oftentimes it can be very, very difficult to get the victim to stop sending the money. And families have to resort to self-help, change the phone number, change the password on the computer, check the mail going in and out of the older adult's house, because sometimes romance scams can be so compelling that people can't get out from under them. Generally speaking, as I've mentioned, the method that scammers are now using to get your money if they want to rip you off is gift cards. It used to be that they would generally tell you to wire the money, to go to the bank or go to the Western Union and wire the money. But the banks and Western Unions have gotten real good about training their tellers and their cashiers. So if you walk in and you happen to mention that you need to wire money because the IRS called and your grandson's been arrested, they're going to warn you that it's a scam. But if you go buy gift cards at any store in the state that sells gift cards, the likelihood is that the cashier at the cash register is not going to ask you why you're buying them or what the purpose is. And so that's the method that the scammers are using. Some merchants are sick of being in the middle of this, and they're starting to try to warn their consumers by putting signage at the point of sale of gift cards, warning about scams, of common scams, but that's still the most common method that the scammers are using. So what should you do to stay safe? How do you stay safe on the phone? Well, for starters, think of the phone as a one-way street. And by that, I mean it's only safe to give personal information out over the phone if you made the call to a number you know to be the real number of your bank, your credit card company, government agency, etc. When someone calls you, you can never be sure they are who they say they are. So if the caller says he's from American Express, hang up the phone, get out your credit card, call, look up the phone number, call American Express back. Now you can be certain that you're really talking to American Express and not to a scammer. So think of the phone as a one-way street. As a means of convincing us to answer the phone, the scammers are using a technology called caller ID spoofing, meaning they can make your caller ID on your phone say whatever they want it to. The caller is claiming to be an IRS agent, they can make your caller ID say IRS, Internal Revenue Service, or even display the Washington, D.C. phone number of the IRS. So you can't be sure the caller is who they say they are. They're using caller ID spoofing. What we urge you to do is to use caller ID as a screening tool and simply don't answer the phone if you don't recognize the number. Let it ring through to voicemail. Scammers usually won't leave a message, and if they do, you can easily delete it. It's not a perfect system to not answer the phone. A couple of years ago, the Attorney General was calling me and I didn't answer the phone because I didn't have her cell number. I didn't realize it was her. She left a voice message. I called her back 20 minutes later and kind of laughed and said, "Well, I didn't pick up her call in the first place." And she said, "I understand, but best thing you can do is simply don't answer the phone if you don't recognize the number." As more and more of us are doing that, the scammers are trying to trick us by using a technique called neighbor spoofing. They spoof a number in your same area code and exchange, but with 4 other digits at the end. And what they're hoping is that you're going to think it's a local business, it's a neighbor, it's someone you know. They're trying to trick you into answering. It's called neighbor spoofing. Don't fall for it. Sometimes what they're even doing is they'll spoof your own number. You'll see your own number appear. And this, I have to admit, I fell for it. I answered my cell phone thinking, did I butt dial myself? How did I call myself? And it was a robocaller trying to sell me an extended warranty. So you can't call your own number. Don't fall for it. There are blocking apps that you can now buy for a fee, a monthly fee, that will also block your call if it's a known robocalling number. There are a bunch of them out there. I choose not to use one of those robocalling apps, but for my mother, I put one on her phone because she was just getting driven crazy by all the calls. So that's another option you have out there. But what I choose to do is simply don't answer the phone if I don't recognize the number. Sometimes people will say to me, "Hey, Gary, you know what? When I see it's a number I don't recognize, here's what I do. I answer the call. I jerk them around for 10 or 15 minutes talking on the phone, and then I laugh, I hang up, and then I hang up." It's not a good idea to do that for 2 reasons. One is you're wasting 10 or 15 minutes of your own time. But the other reason is that a lot of times these calls are generated by a computer that can tell if the phone is answered. And if it is answered, they're going to keep calling that number. The point being that the more of these calls you answer, the more you're going to get. And the fewer of them you answer, the fewer of them you're going to get. And so the best thing to do is don't answer the phone if you don't recognize the number. Yes, you should sign up for the Do Not Call Registry. It will prevent legitimate telemarketers from calling you. DoNotCall.gov. But it's not going to prevent the scammers from calling you. So it's good to do it. You'll get fewer legitimate telemarketing calls, but it's not going to stop the scammers because they're using caller ID spoofing. And even if you report their number to the Federal Trade Commission, it's really not the number that was generating the call in the first place. We're hoping soon that the technology is going to turn in the favor of the consumers. Phone providers are now providing spam warnings. You know, when you answer your cell phone and you see it says potential spam, what they're telling you in essence is that the number that you see on your caller ID is not the number that actually originated the call. And that's why they're warning you that it's potential spam. And if I see that, I would never answer a call like that. Why would I want to answer a call where someone is faking the number, using a fake caller ID spoofing number to try to get me to answer the phone? But hopefully, as the technology gets better, we'll all be safer. We're all shopping and doing a lot of stuff online now lately, right? And so we need to have passwords. And as we get older, we worry about forgetting our passwords. And so when I give a presentation to a group of older adults, and I ask, how many of you have a password which is a grandchild's name? Hands go up. How many of you use your street address or your birthday as your password? Hands go up. Those are weak passwords because the spammers and the hackers can figure them out. They can guess them, they can figure them out. So you want to have a password which you can remember, but which other people can't figure out. And one of the ways we advise you can do that is to think of a song or a poem or a figure of speech that you'll never forget and make an acronym out of the first letter of each word. And so, for example, President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address famously began 77 years ago. So if you took the first letter of each of those words, FSA, SYA, and added a number at the end of it, you're going to be able to, you may not remember FSA, SYA, but as long as you can remember 77 years ago, you'll be able to create the password. My mom, for many years, her Gmail password was the first letter of the line from Shakespeare, "To be or not to be, that is the question." And then she had a number at the end. And if I asked her, "Mom, what's the password?" she couldn't recite the number, the letters. But when she was at her keyboard, she could type out the first letter of each of those words. So that's a good way to have a stronger password. The other thing I want to mention about the internet is when you establish these accounts, they ask you for a security question to answer, right? So that in case you forget your password, they can then ask you the security question so you can get back into your account. And what we're experiencing is that people who choose too easy a security question can easily be hacked. And here's what I mean. If the answer to a security question is your mother's maiden name, or the answer to the security question is your place of birth, a hacker could very easily Google you, find out that information, go online, enter some incorrect gibberish passwords just to prompt the security question. And then if it turns out to be city of birth or mother's maiden name, they have the answer. Now they're in your account. They can change the password and lock you out. So you want to scroll down. You'll see if you choose a new open account, there are other passwords you can choose. Favorite athlete, dog's first pet's name, whatever it was. Choose one of those that's not Googleable about you. It's a much more security answer to use. So I hope I've given you all some information that you can use to stay safe in your daily lives. Stephanie, I'm not sure if we have the ability to take any questions, but if so, I'm glad to answer them. If you want to reach out to the Attorney General's office, you can reach us toll free 1-800-771-7755. That's 1-800-771-7755. We also have a wonderful website with a lot of information, www.ag.ny.gov, ag.ny.gov. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time and attention. I hope you can use this information to stay safe in your daily lives. Good luck getting a vaccine appointment, and I hope everybody can stay safe. And Stephanie, do we have any questions?